I'm Iris Tao in for Steve Lance. And President Trump targets visa abuse with an $100,000 application fee for H-1B work visas. He also suggests that China has now approved a TikTok deal. NTD's Mario Autry has more from the White House.
We need great workers, and this pretty much ensures that that's what's going to happen.
President Trump today is signing a proclamation adding a $100,000 fee to all H-1B visa applications.
One of the most abused visa systems in our current immigration system has been the H-1B non-immigrant visa program.
The White House saying that the fee comes as an effort to curb overuse of the program.
This will ensure that the people they're bringing in are actually very highly skilled and that they're not replaceable by American workers.
The president is also signing an executive order creating a gold card program that would allow people to pay $1 million for a visa and corporations $2 million.
Sort of like a signing bonus in baseball or football. A corporation will be able to get them to stay in the country. And
meanwhile, President Trump today, after a call with Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping, suggests that China approved a TikTok deal without elaborating on what that approval entails.
The TikTok deal is well on its way, as you know, and the investors are getting ready.
But some lawmakers have been expressing concerns about the deal over the app's ties with the CCP. Chairman of the House Select Committee on the CCP, John Molnar, warns in a statement this week that the reported deal could allow the CCP to continue controlling TikTok through its algorithm. And the Department of Justice has previously said that the CCP's access to American user data poses a national security threat, but President Trump stresses that the app will be owned by American investors.
These are American investors, all of them. And they all love our country.
While details on the deal remain unclear, President Trump says he'll speak to Xi again on the phone and plans to meet him in South Korea at the end of October. Meanwhile, the White House releases a tribute video honoring Charlie Kirk's legacy.
He loved America, but most of all, Charlie loved his children, and he loved me.
Set to the words of Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's widow and now CEO of Turning Point, speaking for the first time after her husband's assassination. This as Turning Point receives over 60,000 new chapter requests and President Trump continues to eulogize Kirk. President Trump's expected to speak at Charlie Kirk's memorial on Sunday in Arizona alongside Erica Kirk, Vice President J.D. Vance, and other cabinet members. Reporting from the White House, Mario Autry, NTD News.
Congress must pass government funding for fiscal year 2026 before October 1st. Republicans have proposed to extend current levels of funding, but Democrats have rejected the offer. With a looming shutdown, what are the potential exit ramps for lawmakers? Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details.
On this vote, the yeas are 217, the nays are 212. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Only one Democrat joined with Republicans to extend current levels of government funding and avoid a government shutdown on October 1st.
Republicans know that this partisan, reckless, dirty spending bill is dead on arrival.
House Democratic leadership called on its conference to oppose the continuing resolution, which contained no partisan policy riders. The bill actually keeps government funding levels established by the Biden administration.
A very short 7-week holdover of government funding. We are going to allow more time for the appropriations process to continue. We have been working very hard here to get appropriations back to some semblance of regular order.
Senate Democrats are blaming Republicans for not extending enhanced subsidies to health insurance premiums under the Affordable Care Act that Democrats passed through the Inflation Reduction Act back in 2021. The expiration date of these enhanced subsidies was actually established by Democrats.
Their proposal is status quo. The Americans are not happy. American people are not happy with that status quo. And what our bill says is control rising costs, which American people hate, fix health care, which the Republican big beautiful bill decimated.
Since becoming the leader of Senate Democrats, Senator Chuck Schumer and his leadership team have supported at least 19 continuing resolutions.
He decided and announced a while back that he was not going to go along for a clean short-term CR. Now remember, he's always voted on these in the past. He's never had a problem with it ever before.
Senate Democrats opposed the House-passed continuing resolution. Congress would need at least 7 Senate Democrats to support the short-term stopgap bill to avoid a shutdown. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
A federal judge has rejected President Trump's $15 billion defamation lawsuit against the New York Times and Penguin Random House. U.S. District Judge Stephen Meredith in Florida said the legal complaint should be a short and plain statement. In the suit, Trump's attorneys say that the Times has become a, quote, leading and unapologetic purveyor of falsehoods, outlining 85 pages of examples of what his team calls industrial-scale defamation and libel against political opponents. The judge says a legal complaint is not a megaphone to list out all the evidence. He gave Trump's team 28 days to file an amended complaint of no more than 40 pages. And President Trump's legal team now says it will refile its lawsuit against the New York Times. Joining me now to break down all the legal implications is Neama Rahmani, president and co-founder of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Thank you for joining us. So the judge today said that essentially, the judge today said that essentially that the filing was too long. How standard is it for a judge to reject a lawsuit based on that?
It's not standard, but Judge Meredith is an old school judge, and this is not your standard complaint. And you touched upon it, short and plain. Those are the exact words in the federal rules of civil procedure. Rule 8, you can't talk about the facts for 80 pages before you get to your defamation claim. Now, look, in this particular case, obviously, we're talking about whether the president was a good businessman. That's the allegations that were defamatory in 2024 when he was running for office. So there's a lot of discussion of the president, his father, his businesses, The Apprentice, a lot of the media appearances. So some of that is necessary, but certainly 80 pages is a lot. And I know lawyers like to talk and they like to write, but the judge said, no, this is too much. You got to go back. You got to get me something shorter.
And in addition to that, in saying that a lawsuit should be plain and short, the judge also said that the legal complaint is not supposed to be a, quote, public forum or a megaphone. Of course, we know that there's going to be a lot of media attention inevitably on this case. Does the long complaint actually impact the legal procedure?
It really doesn't. And look, there's law and there's politics. And in this particular case, the president's lawyers want to address both. This is to send a political message to organizations and media outlets like the Times that the president thinks are not favorable or treating him unfairly. I mean, we've seen other lawsuits like this against CBS, against ABC. Obviously, there's a pending lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal. So this is part of the president's political and legal strategy. So he knows that media outlets like this are going to pick up on the complaint and they're going to report on it. So some of that is there for public consumption, for the media and potential voters to review. But as far as the lawsuit goes, it's not really relevant to the allegations in the complaint. So the judge wants to strip that down. He wants to remove all the politics from the case. You certainly can't remove everything in a case like this. When you're talking about a sitting president, probably one of the most high-profile newspapers in the country. But certainly some of it needs to get out so the jurors, if this case ever gets there, can really focus on the facts and the law here.
And you just mentioned some background about this judge, Judge Meredith. Tell us more about him. What do we know? And is there anything about the tone of his comments that we can read into here?
Well, he's an old school judge. He was appointed by the first President Bush in the early 90s. So he's been on the bench for a long time. He's seen a lot of different things. Presidents come and go. He's probably not going to be affected by the political noise, like maybe someone who is going to be a newer judge. He's the most senior judge, I believe, in that district, or at least one of the senior judges. So since he's going to be presiding over this case, that again, is going to get a lot of attention. What he's trying to do is send a message to both Trump's lawyers as well as the lawyers for the Times and the other defendants that if they're going to try a case in his court, that they better follow the law and leave all that political noise now. Now, it's important to note, this is just a procedural win for the Times. The president's lawyers will refile. That complaint will be accepted, assuming it conforms to the judge's guidelines. And we're going to move forward with this case. There may be a settlement, of course, like the other cases, or it may go all the way to trial, which will be fascinating because all of a sudden we know truth is a defense to defamation. So the issue of was the president a good business person, that's going to be tried by men and women there in Florida.
Well, that would definitely be some really watchable debate there. I mean, while you just mentioned that, of course, this is part of the president's legal as well as political strategy, we have seen that the lawsuit does accuse the New York Times of being a, quote, virtual mouthpiece for the Democratic Party through a variety of sophisticated tactics. Do you think some version of this lawsuit could succeed given the ground of it?
It could, and obviously the president does feel that some of the legacy media, mainstream media, has treated him unfairly. Obviously, we've talked about, fake news, or we recently saw with Jimmy Kimmel and what ABC did just this week. So the New York Times, the president and his lawyers do believe, is a left-leaning newspaper. I'm not trying to get into the politics, but sort of understanding what the president is trying to do. They do argue that some of these stories and some of these books written by the co-defendants were hit pieces. Again, I'm not saying that that's necessarily true, but that's certainly what the president and his lawyers believe and what they intend to prove. Of course, there are First Amendment protections for media outlets like this one, so there is that heightened standard that the president has to meet. And of course, like I mentioned, truth is a defense. So it's a question of, is the Times going to settle like some of these other outlets? They've paid certainly not billions of dollars, but they've paid more than tens of millions of dollars if you're looking at the settlements that CBS and ABC entered into. Or do they push this case? The Wall Street Journal is so far is the Times may again push this case all the way to trial, in which case it'll be fascinating because we'll finally see one of these defamation cases go to trial. Now, of course, Jean Carroll sued the president for defamation, but as far as the president being a plaintiff and suing one of these media defendants, it's maybe one of the first cases to actually go all the way and not settle.
And speaking of defamation, we know that it's a huge subject when it comes to media law. So tell us more about what's the standard for proving defamation. We know that a president has alleged that the New York Times was showing actual malice and everything else. Tell us more. What kind of potential evidence does the president's team need to prove in order for them to potentially win?
It's that actual malice standard, and you touched upon it, because the president is a public figure, probably the most public figure in the United States. He has to show that the Times and the other authors engaged in actual malice. So what does that mean? That means that they knew the statements were false, or they acted with reckless disregard for the truth. That's the standard. It's not an easy standard to meet. Now, we are seeing more and more defamation cases in this country. I talked about the one against the president, but there's been some very high-profile ones in the past few years. Alex Jones, for instance, was hit with a very big defamation judgment for some of his reporting on the Sandy Hook shooting. Or probably the case that many people watched, got a lot of attention, was Johnny Depp suing his ex Amber Heard for defamation. So we are seeing many more defamation laws in the past 5 to 10 years or so than we have historically. And one of the reasons is because of social media and traditional media reporting on everything. It's not the olden days where there was a newspaper that maybe the city or the metropolitan area read. Now, with a story, it can go viral. It can get millions, tens, or even hundreds of millions of views. So this is something we're seeing a lot more in different contexts. It can be entertainment, it can be podcasters, or it can be sitting president of the United States.
Well, definitely a very high-profile case, and it's going to even get more attention potentially if it does go to trial. Neama Rahmani, thank you so much for sharing your legal insights with us today. Appreciate it. After months of delay, the last of President Trump's cabinet members, level officials have been confirmed. Former National Security Advisor Mike Waltz will serve as the new U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Waltz served as the president's national security advisor from the inauguration to May 1st. His confirmation hearings were delayed due to procedural objections. The former GOP congressman says that the UN needs major reforms and that he's committed to combating anti-Semitism in the organization. Waltz's confirmation comes as President Trump is set to address the UN General Assembly in New York next Tuesday.